All right, so this is chapter 4, part 2. And this chapter is pretty long, so if I feel like I am not reading to give the story justice or a character a voice or something, then I'll just stop. Hold on, let me get adjusted here again. Yeah, so I hope I can finish it, but always feel free to pause. Here we go. I guess you could say my mother has hidden talents. I mean, her only child is a boy. Where did she learn to comb out girl hair? By the time I felt it safe to venture back to the kitchen, she was finished. I expected Sarah to be bald, but she wasn't. Her hair looked okay, even something close to clean. Do you need a ride home? My mother asked Sarah. No, that's okay, I can walk. To where? I wondered, having trouble imagining a boxy brick house that contained Sarah Kervick and her mom and dad and all their ratty, unraveling sweaters. Come back tomorrow and I'll give you some cream rinse to help keep it smooth, my mother said. You can walk home with Franklin. As she passed by us on her way out the door, Sarah glared at me as if that were the last thing she wanted to do. Well, excuse me. I watched her go all the way down the block. When she thought she was a safe distance from the house, she started skipping. Then on the corner, she stopped, letting her hands travel up and down the back of her head. Then she started skipping again. She proceeded directly into the street without even looking both ways. My mother moved to Pelican View so that I would have a safe place to grow up. Maybe I should be thankful she didn't want to live on the Lower East Side of New York City or Calcutta, India, but frankly, it was hard to feel grateful the following day when I found myself walking home with Sarah Kervick. We headed home along Main Street, past Fortuna's hobby shop, the post office, and Professor Quiggle's book nook. Sarah walked about 6 steps ahead, which was just fine with me. Being seen with her wasn't exactly good for my reputation either. Suddenly, she stopped dead in front of Perkins' drugstore. As I came up behind her, I could see she was staring at a picture of a lady holding out her hands in front of her and smiling. No more unsightly warts, the lady announced to the camera. Finally, I can go out again. I continued on my way, past a frozen Sarah Kervick. Suddenly, her hand shot out, grabbed me by the shoulder in some kind of kung fu torture grip, and twirled me around. Listen, she said. I want some of that stuff. I remembered the wart on her knee, but now with her hand on my shoulder, I saw something else. She had warts on her fingers, too. Notice I said warts, as in plural. Let's just say some more warts than most ladies have rings. Fine, I said, trying to sound calm as I imagined wart juices leaking onto my jacket. I'll wait here. Not me. You go in there and get some. I'd be happy to buy you some wart remover. Really, I would do it gladly, I replied in the same tone of voice I might use when talking to a malnourished Bengal tiger. But I don't have any money right now. No problem there, said Sarah, pointing to an emblem on the front door. They take MasterCard and Visa. But I don't... Listen, punk, she whispered, moving her hand from my shoulder to my throat. Her fingers were now inside my jacket, close to the skin. She had penetrated my first line of defense. Now seemed a good time to panic. You may like being a freak. You may get something out of it, but I don't. Now go in there and get me some of that stuff in the picture. Do it any way you know how. Do it or I'm gonna push on these shoulders. With her hands, she demonstrated some sort of crushing Slavic nutcracker technique that would result in one's lungs exchanging places until I closed like a suitcase. As soon as I finished hyperventilating, I straightened my jacket and entered the store. Perkins's was an old-fashioned drugstore with a soda fountain up front and the shop in the back. Mr. Perkins is the third Mr. Perkins to run this store. He is always impeccably dressed, with a red bow tie peeking out of a starched white lab coat. While his personal cleanliness is not to be questioned, we have had many conversations regarding public health and foodborne illnesses. As a rule, you see, I've refused to eat in a restaurant. I know what those service people are doing behind the swinging double doors. Once I caught sight of a greasy-haired teenager dragging my glass through the ice machine without gloves on. Unfortunately, I had to report him to the health inspector right away. Mr. Perkins was very sorry to hear about that. "Oh, hello, Franklin." Mr. Perkins smiled at me. "I'll be with you in a minute." And he went in the back, like he always did, to get the results of his most recent health inspection. I realized that this was my moment. With Mr. Perkins off the floor, I could accomplish my dirty deed and be gone. How unprepared I was. Where were the wart removers and beauty aids and topical applications? As I frantically raced up and down the aisles, Mr. Perkins reappeared with a handful of papers. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Perkins," I said, panting. "I don't want anything to eat. I was just wondering, do you have any wart remover?" Oh, sure. In foot care. What kind of wart is it?" I realized with horror that he thought I, Franklin Delano Donut Head, was the carrier of a fungal virus. Fortunately, I am disease-free, Mr. Perkins. It's my mother who suffers. "Oh, okay, where's the wart?" "The wart is on her." I glanced between the lines to see that Sarah Kervick had not deserted her post. Her hands were shoved up under her armpits, and she was leaning against the mailbox, frowning. Poor old Mrs. Finster, who at 97 was the oldest lady in town, was trying to straighten up long enough to mail a letter. Her finger," I said finally. "And is it raised or below the surface of the skin?" I would say raised." I followed Mr. Perkins' crisp white lab coat through the aisles to the foot care section, where every manner of disgusting and horrifying condition was depicted on the packages. Treatments for warts, corns, athlete's foot, and excessive odor lined the shelves. "She has a couple of options, Franklin. She can use this solution and paint it on with a brush, or sort of like a fingernail polish," he said, smiling at me as if we men understood something about the way women like to do things. "Or she can use this specially treated bandage approach for several days. Or what I recommend most often, because it's economical, is the patch. You can cut it to size of the wart and stick it on, but you should cover it with a regular bandage." At that, Mr. Perkins left me to consider my choices. Little did he know that instead of weighing my choices of various topical treatments, I was envisioning a long prison term, eating food laced with lard, and bathing barefoot in a public shower with men who had committed violent crimes. Hands shaking, I reached for the most economical choice. Maybe I could get my sentence reduced by pleading that I was trying to have as little effect on Mr. Perkins' financial picture as possible. As I started to stuff the sheet of acid-coated paper into my jacket pocket, I froze. Seeing my distorted reflection in the little round security mirror, I realized I was standing at a crossroads in my life. Not just the intersection between foot care and beauty aids, but a point where I had to choose between doing the honorable thing and doing the cowardly thing. It was the point in the story, my story, if you mind, where the hero's character is tested. Yes, this was a character building moment. I decided to throw myself on the mercy of the pharmacist. Mr. Perkins, I called, jogging through the store until I found him in the seasonal items. Have you ever had the opportunity to steer some down-on-his-luck youngster away from a bit of crime? Mr. Perkins thought about that for a moment. Well, Franklin, I would have to say yes to that. You'd be surprised at the number of children who come in here and take things without paying. Well, I, for one, will not swell their ranks, Mr. Perkins. I declared, slapping the wart treatment on the counter, and I told him my story. When I was finished, Mr. Perkins walked casually over to the front window and began to straighten the greeting cards. As he was doing that, he glanced outside. Then he came strolling back to me. Franklin, he said, I'll tell you what. I have a fund for situations like this. I'll give you what you need, and the fund will take care of paying for it. And this will remain just between you and me, Franklin. Mr. Perkins, I said solemnly, someday when I occupy a highly respected position in the community, I will repay you for the kindness. And I reached out to shake his hand, which I think he knew well was a gesture of my greatest respect. Mr. Perkins went back to foot care and put 2 more sheets of wart paper into a small bag. Then he went to first aid and added a tin of bandages and a manicure scissors. I walked out of the store with my head held high and handed over the bag. Sarah grabbed it without saying thank you and squinted furiously at the glass window of Perkins Drugstore. You were holding out on me, she said. I beg your pardon. Most times when you're lifting something, they don't give you a bag. As I started the bag, the thought occurred to me that maybe Sarah Kerbick was not as violent as she first appeared. Maybe she was like one of those wolf girls raised in a cave in India and later found by missionaries. She just had no understanding of the rules of polite society. Besides, she could hardly grind me into a pulp right here on Main Street in front of Perkins Drugstore. When I undertake a project, Miss Kerbick, I said, straightening the lapels of my jacket, I do it with a touch of class. At that she laughed, throwing her head back and looking directly at the sun. Then she continued walking 6 steps in front of me to my house, which is very strange considering I never gave her the directions, and she'd only been there once. Tell me something, she said after a 14-block silence. This freaky stuff you got going, about germs and all, is that an act? We rounded the corner and crossed the street to my block. The wind had picked up, and I dug my hands deeper into my pockets, hunching forward. If you're referring to the attention I paid to my personal hygiene, I assure you, I am completely in earnest. So it's for real? She stopped, waiting for me to catch up. When I was as close as I was likely to get, Sarah Kerbick asked, Does a kid like you have any friends? For a moment, we faced each other in silence, shivering there in the cold. I never really looked at it that way before. I've always felt that when the right candidate came along, we would be fast friends. Trouble was, there were no candidates, let alone right ones. The kids at Pelican View Elementary weren't exactly vying for the honor of hanging out with Franklin Delano Donut Head. I started to feel this sadness again, creeping up under my shirt and wrapping my heart in cold styrofoam. I thumped my chest, wishing Sarah Krivik would stop looking at me, wishing I could just, for once, not be the object of someone's pity. Do you ever watch those nature programs where the lioness goes after the herd of gazelles? I asked her, blowing into my hands as if somehow miraculously this would ease the icy feeling in my chest. Sure, I like that stuff. Well, I said, I have a theory about that. I'm going to stop because my husband is now on a Zoom meeting. So there is, we will finish on halfway through 41. And they're just a few pages. I'm sorry. Just don't want to present this in a way that would be just, not just the best that I can do. Don't know what you're hearing on your end.